What if the woman you were about to marry wasn't running toward you, but running from someone far more dangerous than you could imagine? The wind in the San Luis Valley carried that warning the afternoon Jack Callaway waited outside the Highline Saloon. At 35, he looked like the land itself. Lean, weathered, carved by storms and long winters. His ranch was failing. His savings were thinning. And the loneliness after his wife Martha died had become a cold shadow in every room of his small house. That was why he had placed that advertisement in a newspaper back east. A mail-order bride. Not for love, but for help, for survival, for a second chance at keeping the ranch alive. He had expected someone soft-spoken, maybe unsure, maybe hopeful. But when the dusty stagecoach rattled into the center of Esperanza, and the passengers stepped down one by one, the last figure to appear was nothing like he imagined. Nora Hart stood straight as a fence post, her simple dark dress clean. Despite the long ride, her cloak pulled tight around her narrow frame. Her hair was pulled back hard, without a single loose strand. She carried one small, worn satchel, nothing more. But it was her eyes that struck him the hardest, blue-gray, still, watchful, like ashes after a fire that still burned somewhere deep, hidden from sight. "Mr. Callaway," she said, her voice calm and low. "Ma'am," he answered, touching his hat. A few townsfolk stopped to stare. Everyone in Esperanza knew Jack's story. They watched, with raised brows and hushed whispers, as Nora followed him toward the buckboard wagon. When he reached out a hand to help her up, she paused, not long, but long enough for him to see the faint flicker of fear. Then she climbed in on her own. The ride out of town was quiet. Jack spoke only to point out landmarks. Nora spoke not at all. She kept one hand tucked deep beneath her cloak, as if guarding something precious or dangerous. The valley was wide and open. The late autumn wind sharp as a blade. Dust trailed behind them in long ribbons. Jack watched her from the corner of his eye. She didn't flinch at the rough road or the cold. She didn't show awe at the mountains or fear of the emptiness. She studied everything with silent calculation, like someone who needed to understand every escape route. When the wooden bridge that crossed into Jack's land came into view, a tall man stood waiting beside a mule. Reverend Amos Pierce, the mail carrier, preacher, and one of the few steady souls in the valley. "Reverend," Jack said, pulling the horses to a stop. "Jackson," Amos answered, nodding. Then his eyes shifted to Nora. "Welcome, ma'am. This valley can be a hard place, but you'll find good hearts in it." Nora dipped her head politely, her face unreadable. Amos leaned closer to Jack. His voice dropped to almost nothing, nearly stolen by the wind. "I was in Santa Fe last week," he murmured. "There are men asking after a young woman. They claim she owes a debt to her former master down in New Orleans. They use the name Lily." The world seemed to narrow to a single line of sound, the rumble of the creek beneath the bridge. Jack stiffened. "What sort of debt?" Quote. The Reverend's eyes flicked toward Nora for the briefest heartbeat. "The kind no decent man would ever speak of," he said. "Be careful." Before Jack could ask more, Amos tipped his hat, clicked his mule forward, and was gone. Jack turned slowly toward Nora. She sat as still as stone. Her shoulders locked, her hand inside her cloak clenched so tight he could see her knuckles through the fabric. She didn't look at him, didn't speak. But her face had gone pale. Her jaw fixed hard, her eyes staring into the horizon like she saw ghosts rising out of the dust. Whoever Lily was, she terrified Nora. Whoever was hunting her had come far. Jack guided the wagon forward, feeling the weight of something he did not understand settle over them both like a storm about to break. The Callaway Ranch sat in a small bend of the land, humble but sturdy. Flood scars still marked the earth. The barn leaned slightly to the west. It was a place built with sweat and grief. Jack helped her down, carried her lone satchel into the house, and showed her the spare room. "My late wife's room is there," he said quietly. Yours is the other. Thank you, Nora answered. Her voice held no warmth but no rudeness either. It was simply guarded. Inside the small bedroom, everything was clean and simple. A bed, quilt, washstand. He had added a sprig of wild aster in a jar, hoping it might make the room feel welcoming. Nora stared at the flower for a moment. Something passed over her face, too quick to name. When she turned back to him, her expression was steady again. Mr. Callaway, she said, her tone firm but respectful. I came here to work. I need no special care. I ask only for room and board. I will keep to my own space, and I expect the same. It was not the speech of a bride. It was the speech of a survivor. Jack nodded once. Agreed. Outside, the wind howled against the walls as if trying to claw its way inside. They stood in the silence of two strangers joined by necessity, not trust. But Jack saw it, just for a second, when Nora glanced at the door. A shadow passed through her eyes, a fear so old and deep it had carved itself into her bones. She wasn't just starting a new life, she was running from something that wanted to claim her. And Jack Callaway, who had lost almost everything this land could take, felt something heavy settle in his chest. She was his wife now. No matter the danger that followed her, he would face it. How do two people live under the same roof when one of them is afraid of every sound the night carries? Winter hit the San Luis Valley like a hammer. The cold sank into the earth, into the wood of the house, into the bones of the people who lived there. And inside the Callaway ranch, a different kind of cold settled between Jack and Nora. Quiet, polite, cautious. They worked side by side, but they did not speak much. They shared meals, but not stories. They slept in rooms separated by a thin hallway, though, in truth, they lived in two different worlds. Still, Jack noticed everything. Nora woke before dawn each day, moving like a shadow across the kitchen. Fresh biscuits. Hot coffee. A house kept so clean it looked like no one lived in it at all. She worked the ranch with a level of skill that surprised him. She mended fences with tight, perfect knots. She mucked stalls, split wood, and did not complain, even when the wind cut through her like a knife. But she kept her back to the wall any time they were in the barn together. She avoided standing near the doorway unless she had a clear path out. And any sudden noise, a gust, slamming the shutters, a log cracking in the fire, made her freeze. Her hand always went to her chest, always to something hidden inside her dress. Jack never asked what it was. He never asked who Lily was. But he wondered. Every night after she retired to her room, he found himself listening to her footsteps, listening for signs of fear, and he hated that she seemed to be waiting for danger to break down the door. One late afternoon in November, trouble nearly found them, but not the kind either expected. Juniper, his best mare, had tangled herself in an old coil of barbed wire left behind by the previous owner. The horse was panicking, kicking wildly, cutting deeper into her own flank. Jack ran toward her, heart pounding. But Nora reached the mare first. "It's all right," she murmured softly, her voice steady and calm in a way he had never heard. "Easy, girl." Easy. She had grabbed wire cutters from the barn wall without hesitation. Jack held the horse still while Nora moved with surprising skill, using the cutters to snap each length of wire. Her hands were steady, her eyes sharp. She worked with a quiet bravery that left Jack stunned. But when the lantern light hit her sleeve, something else stunned him even more. She had pushed her dress up past her elbow. Her arm, her whole forearm, was covered in scars. Thin lines, thick lines, some faint, some deep. A horrible, tangled map of healed wounds. Not the mark of accidents, not the mark of ranch work, the mark of cruelty. Jack's breath caught in his throat. The rag dropped from his hand. Nora saw where he was looking. Her eyes widened, not in fear of him, but in shame. She yanked her sleeve down swiftly. Jack said nothing. He didn't flinch, didn't pity her, didn't question her. He simply picked up his coat and stepped toward her, gently, Very gently, he laid it over her shoulders, hiding her scars. "Hold the lantern up," he said softly. "I need to see this last bit." No judgment, no questions, just quiet protection. She held the lantern. Her hand trembled only once. That night, the coldest storm yet blew in from the mountains. The wind screamed around the house. A loose shutter on the window broke free, slamming against the siding over and over like a giant fist. Thump! 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 Jack woke instantly, his heart pounding. Then he heard a sound that froze him, a gasp, a cry. Nora. He rushed into the main room, rifle in hand, expecting men, expecting danger. Her room was empty. The door hung open. And outside, in the snow, were her footprints, bare, frantic, running toward the outbuildings. Jack followed them in the freezing wind. He found her inside the granary, huddled in a corner, knees pulled to her chest, trembling so hard her teeth chattered. Her nightgown was thin against the cold. Her eyes were wide and unfocused, staring at the door like she expected a monster to burst through at any second. She wasn't in Colorado anymore. She was trapped in a memory. He wanted to gather her up. He wanted to wrap her in blankets. He wanted to chase away whatever ghost had followed her into the night. But any sudden move would only push her deeper into fear. So he lowered his rifle, set it aside, and slowly moved to the opposite corner of the room. He sat down on the cold dirt floor, far enough not to startle her, close enough for her to know she wasn't alone. He didn't speak. He kept his eyes on the door. He sat guard. Minutes passed, then an hour, then 2. The wind howled. The shutter banged. Nora's breathing softened. Her eyes came back into focus. And then, finally, she looked at him. Not with fear, not with suspicion, with disbelief. As dawn touched the sky with pale light, she whispered, "You stayed." He nodded once. "You're safe." That morning changed everything. Nora didn't become open or talkative. She didn't suddenly trust him. But the ice between them began to melt. And Jack, realizing that the danger following her was real and close, began to build something she didn't ask for but desperately needed. A hidden room inside the root cellar. Behind a wall of stacked crates, reinforced with timber, stocked with food and water, connected to a narrow pipe leading straight to the spring. A secret refuge. Nora watched him build it. She never asked what it was for. But he saw in her eyes that she understood. She was no longer alone, not in the house, not in danger, not in the world. Bit by bit, she began to change. She spent more time with the animals. She spoke softly to the horses, her voice warm in a way he never heard in the house. Sometimes he heard her humming, a simple, sad melody that floated over the barn like a prayer. And then one day, Jack brought out the Winchester. "Everyone in the valley should know how to use one," he told her. Nora froze. The rifle terrified her. But she tried anyway. Her first shot went wide. The bang shook her to her core. She dropped the rifle, hands flying to her ears, breath shaking. But after a long, trembling moment, she lifted it again. By the end of the week, she still couldn't hit the tin cans, but she no longer ran from the sound. She stood her ground, and as the snow melted and spring whispered its arrival, Jack realized something. Nora wasn't just surviving, she was fighting to return to herself, and he was determined to stand beside her, whether she accepted his help or not, because he had seen her wounds. And he knew she had survived far more than anyone in the valley would ever understand. What happens when a woman who has run her whole life finally decides to stand still and fight? Spring brought warmer winds to the San Luis Valley. Snow melted down the mountains, filling the creeks until they ran fast and cold. Cattle bawled in the fields. The land softened, turned green, and breathed again. Nora breathed too. Not all at once, not all the way, but enough. She spoke a little more. She held her head a little straighter. She no longer jumped at every sound. And the hidden room Jack built in the cellar, though never spoken of, remained ready. A quiet promise. Still, danger was coming. Jack heard it first from Reverend Amos Pierce, who arrived riding hard one afternoon, dust-covered and solemn. "There's a man in town," he said, "asking about a girl. Calls her Lily." Nora stopped in place. The color drained from her face. Her hands trembled before she forced them still. Jack didn't ask questions. He didn't have to. He understood too much already. "Is it him?" Jack asked. Amos nodded. "Martin Beauregard." The name hung heavy in the air. Jack began preparing the ranch before Amos even left the yard. New locks, stronger bolts, tightened fences, loaded rifles. Nora watched him with a quiet, haunted understanding. Jack's plan was clear: protect her, fortify the ranch, and be ready to fight. But Nora had a different plan, one she carried in her heart and in the letters hidden inside her dress. Because she had written to someone months earlier. The Philadelphia Society, a group known for helping people who had no voice and nowhere else to run. She didn't tell Jack. She didn't want to raise hope. She didn't want to bring her danger onto him. But that letter would change everything. Before it did, trouble arrived wearing fine clothing. Martin Beauregard. He appeared in Esperanza with a lawyer and hired guns, spreading lies. That Nora Lily was a runaway servant, that she had stolen from him. That she needed to be returned to her rightful master. A terrible word, a lie wrapped in legal paper, a claim printed on a notice nailed to the post office door. Jack saw it first, his jaw tightening, blood burning cold in his veins. He rode home at once. "We're going to the judge," he told her. Nora didn't argue. She didn't hide. She didn't run. Not anymore. They rode into town side by side. The Highline Saloon had been turned into a courtroom. The townspeople packed the room, eyes shifting between Nora and the man claiming to own her. Beauregard sat proud and polished, a snake disguised in a gentleman's suit. Jack sat beside Nora, solid as a mountain at her back. The lawyer spoke first, waving a yellowed bill of sale. "My client has come to reclaim his property." The word made Jack's fists clench until his knuckles went white. When the judge asked Nora to respond, Jack stood instead. "She's not property," he said, voice steady as bedrock. "She is a free woman, born free, living free, and no man owns her." His words rolled through the room like thunder. Jack wasn't a fancy talker, but simple truth, spoken by a man of integrity, carries more weight than any lawyer's tricks. The saloon fell completely silent. Judge Ashby lifted the paper, squinting at it through steel-rimmed glasses. Then, everything exploded. Beauregard's hired thugs moved suddenly. Chairs toppled. Men shouted. They rushed forward, planning to grab Nora and drag her outside where a wagon waited. Jack lunged to shield her, but Nora was faster. "This way!" she shouted, grabbing his sleeve and pulling him toward the side door. They ran through the alley, boots pounding on dirt. Gunshots cracked behind them. Jack fired back, covering their retreat. Nora remembered the land. She remembered every escape route Jack had shown her. She led him toward a steep cut in the earth, the arroyo. The canyon swallowed them, giving them a brief shield from the bullets. But the wagon raced along the canyon rim, trying to get ahead and trap them. "Let me see the Winchester," Nora said, breath shaking but voice steady. Jack hesitated only a second, then handed it to her. She rested the rifle on a boulder, took a long, slow breath, held it, and fired. The shot cracked through the canyon. The wagon wheel shattered. The wagon crashed onto its side, blocking the entire path. Beauregard's men stopped, swearing in frustration, and then hoofbeats thundered across the valley. A dozen riders appeared at the canyon mouth, carrying badges of the U.S. Marshals. "Martin Beauregard," the leading marshal shouted, "you are under arrest for kidnapping, trafficking, and violation of federal law." Beauregard's face crumpled in disbelief. Nora stood tall on the canyon floor, the Winchester still warm in her hands. Her letter had reached Philadelphia. Her voice had been heard. Justice had come. When they returned to the saloon, the judge read the official ruling. Nora May Stevenson is, and has always been, a free woman. Any attempt to claim otherwise is illegal under the Constitution of the United States. The room erupted in applause, slow at first, then rising as people finally saw her truth. Jack didn't cheer. He looked at her quietly, with pride deeper than words. They rode home slower this time, no fear behind them, no threat following. Just the open land stretching toward a future neither imagined when she stepped off that stagecoach. In the weeks that followed, Beauregard was taken away in chains. His hired men were jailed. The sheriff who helped him was removed from office. And letters from Philadelphia confirmed that 7 other women had been freed because of Nora's testimony. Her strength had reached farther than the valley. It had changed lives she would never meet. And as the valley warmed into summer, she found another change growing quietly inside her. One evening, she took Jack's hand and placed it gently over her stomach. He froze, then looked at her, eyes wide, breath catching. "Are you?" She nodded, smiling softly. "Yes. And if it's a girl, I want to name her Hope." Jack pulled her into his arms, holding her as if the whole world had narrowed to the space between them. A woman who once ran from everything now stood rooted. A man who once lived alone now had a family forming beneath his hands. And a ranch, once on the edge of failure, had become a home for healing and new beginnings. The cowboy had seen her wounds. He had stood guard over her pain. And now he stood beside her, ready for a future built not from fear, but from love stronger than the storms of the valley. Their story, one of survival, courage, and the quiet power of 2 hearts learning to trust, had finally come to rest in peace. And it would grow, like all things in the valley, into something strong and lasting.